When we talk about history's biggest failures, we usually look at engineering disasters, like a bridge collapsing into a river, or a financial crash that wipes out a generation of wealth. But while a bridge can be rebuilt and an economy can recover, the loss of life and the displacement of entire populations are irreversible. Operation Barbarossa, launched in the summer of 1941, represents the extreme end of that scale. At the time, Adolf Hitler controlled much of Europe. His military had faced very little resistance, fostering a level of ambition that led him to target the Soviet Union. That single decision sent millions of people to their graves and locked Nazi Germany on a direct path to its own destruction. To understand the magnitude of this mistake, we have to look past the troop movements on a map and see the specific human consequences of a plan driven by pure arrogance. This map shows the physical reality of the invasion. The front line alone stretched for 1,800 miles across Eastern Europe. The volume of resources committed was massive: 3 million soldiers, 3,000 tanks, and thousands of aircraft. But as those forces pushed hundreds of miles deep into Soviet territory, their supply routes had to stretch to follow them. German leadership knew these distances were vast. They proceeded anyway, assuming the Soviet resistance would collapse in a matter of weeks, well before those long supply chains became a problem. That assumption proved wrong. The rapid advance ground to a halt as fuel and food struggled to reach the front, and the highly organized march fractured into isolated, starving units. Then the autumn rains turned the unpaved roads into deep, impassable mud. Vehicles were swallowed whole, and when the freezing winter set in shortly after, the mechanical failure was absolute. The operation failed because it was based on abstract lines on a map, ignoring the geographic and environmental reality of the land they were trying to conquer. But the failure of a strategy on a map means real people freeze to death in the dirt. Troops found themselves trapped in sub-zero temperatures without winter clothing, suffering widespread frostbite and disease while fighting a deeply entrenched defense. The attrition was grinding and merciless. In the months that followed, millions of soldiers on both sides were killed, wounded, or captured. The devastation spread far past the battlefields. As the front shifted, entire towns were reduced to ash, forcing millions of civilians from their homes and erasing whole communities from existence. This single operation resulted in the loss of millions of individual lives, representing a toll that outweighs any strategic gain or territorial objective. That loss of life delivered a fatal wound to the German military. By getting permanently bogged down in the Soviet Union, the regime drained its manpower, its industrial output, and its raw materials at a rate it could not sustain. Meanwhile, the Soviet forces survived the initial onslaught, rebuilt their lines, and launched a relentless counteroffensive that began slowly grinding the front back toward Berlin. Because the German war machine had hollowed itself out in the east, it lacked the resources to defend its own borders from the Allied advances pushing in from the west. The overreach of 1941 directly created the reality of 1945. Germany was left in complete physical and political ruin, its cities reduced to rubble. Which brings us back to the definition of history's biggest failure. Operation Barbarossa remains the primary example of an ambition that consumed itself, ending in millions of deaths and the total destruction of the state that conceived it.